Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you all for joining. We are gathered here to pray for our brothers and sisters in Palestine, and we would like to begin with the recitation of Dua Joshani Sagir. So, Brother Hussein Mushtahidi, whenever you're ready, you can begin.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إلهي كم من عدو انتضى علي سيف عداوته، وشهد لي ضبة مدية، ورهف لي شبع هد، وضاف لي قواتل السموم، وسدد إلي صوائب السهام، ولم تنم عني عين حراسة، واضمر أن يسومني المكروه، ويجر عني ضعاف مرارة. نظرت إلى ضعفي عن احتمال الفوادح، وأجزي عن الانتصار ممن قصدني بمحاربته، ووحدتي في كثير ممن ناواني وارصد لي، فيما لم أعمل فكري في الإرصاد لهم بمثله. فأيدتني بقوتك، وشددت أزري بنصرتك، وفللت لي حدا، وخذلته بعد جمع عديده وحشده، وعليت كعبي علي، ووجهت ما سدد إلي من مكائده إلي، ورددته علي، ولم يشفي غليلا، ولم تبرد حزازات غيظ، وقد عض علي أناملا، وادبر موليا قد اخفقت سرايا. فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب، وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد، واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين، والآلائك من الذاكرين. إلهي وكم من باغ بغاني بمكائده، ونصب لي إشراك مصائده، ووكل بي تفقد رعايته، واضبى إلي إذباء السبع لتريدته، انتظارا لانتهاز فرصته، وهو يظهر بشاشة الملاق، ويبسط وجها غير طليق. فلما رأيت دغل سريرته، وقبح من طوى عليه لشريكه في ملته، وأصبح مجلبا لي في بغيه، إركسته لأم رأسه، وأتيت بنيانه من أساسه. فصرعته في زبيته ورديته في مهو حفرته وجعلت خده طبقا لتراب رجله وشغلته في بدنه ورزقه ورميته بحجره وخنقته بوتره وذكيته بمشاقصه وكببته لمنخره ورددت كيده في نهره وربقته بندامته وفساته بحسرته فاستغذأ وتضاءل بعد نخوته وانقمع بعد استطالته ذليلا ماسورا في ربق حبالته التي كان يؤمل أن يراني فيها يوم سطوته وقد كدت يا ربي لولا رحمتك أن يحل بي ما حل بساحته فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين إلهي وكم من حاسد شرق بحسرته وعدو شجي بغيظه وسلقني بحد لسانه ووخزني بموقعين وجعلني غرضا لمراميه وقلدني خلالا لم تزل فيه ناديتك يا ربي مستجيرا بك واثقا بسرعة إجابتك متوكلا على ما لم أزل أتعرف من حسن دفاعك عالما أنه لا يضطهد من آوى إلى ظل كنفك ولن تقرأ الحوادث ومن لجأ إلى معقل الانتصار بك فحسنتني من بأسي بقدرتك فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لنعمائك من الشام من الذات إلهي وكم من سحائب مكروه جليتها والسماء نعمة مطرتها وجداول كرامة جريتها وعيون إحداث طمستها وناشئة رحمة نشرتها وجنة عافية ألبستها وغمامر كربات كشفتها وأمور جارية قدرتها لم تعجزك إذ طلبتها ولم تمتنع منك إذ عرضتها فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين إلهي وكم من ظن حسن حققت، ومن كسر إملاق جبرت، ومن مسكنة فادحة حولت، ومن صرعة مهلكة عشت، ومن مشقة أرحت. لا تسأل عما تفعل وهم يسألون، ولا ينقصك من فقت، ولقد سئلت فأعطيت، ولم تسأل فابتدعت، واستميح باب فضلك فما أكديت. أبيت إلا إنعاما وامتنانا، وأبيت إلا تطولا يا ربي وإحسانا، وأبيت إلا انتهاكا لحرماتك، واجتراء على معاصيك، وتعديا لحدودك، وغفلة عن وعيدك، وطاعة لعدوي وعدوك. لم يمنعك يا إلهي وناصري إخلالي بالشكر عن إتمام إحسانك، ولا هجزني ذلك عن ارتكاب مساخطك. اللهم وهذا مقام عبد ذليل اعترف لك بالتوحيد، وأقر على نفسه بالتقصير في أداء حقك، وشهد لك بسبوغ نعمتك عليه وجميل عادتك عنده وإحسانك إليه. فهب لي يا إلهي وسيدي من فضلك ما أريده سببا إلى رحمتك، واتخذه سلما أعرج فيه إلى مرضاتك، وآمنوا به من سخطك بعزتك وطولك، وبحق نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. فلك الحمد يا ربي بالمقتدر الذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد، واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين، ولآلائك من الذاكرين. إلهي وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح في كرب الموت، وهشرجت الصدر والنظر إلى ما تقشعر منه الجلود وتفزع له القلوب، وأنا في عافية من ذلك كله. فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب، وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد، واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين، ولآلائك من الذاكرين. إلهي وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح سقيما موجعا في أنة العويل، يتقلب في غمه لا يجد محيصا، ولا يسيغ طعاما ولا شرابا، وأنا في صحة من البدن وسلامة من العيش، كل ذلك منك. فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي عنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين. إلهي وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح خائفا مرعوبا مشفقا وجلا هاربا طريدا منجهرا في مضيق ومخبات من المخابي. قد ضاقت عليه الأرض برحبها لا يجد حيلة ولا منجا ولا مأوى وأنا في أمن وطمانينة وعافية من ذلك كله. فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين. إلهي وسيدي وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح مغلولا مكبلا في الحديد بأيدي العداة لا يرحمون فقيدا من أهله وولده منقطعا عن إخوانه وبلده يتوقع كل ساعة بأي قتلة يقتل وبأي مثلة يمثل به وأنا في عافية من ذلك كله. فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين. إلهي وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح يقاسي الحرب ومباشرة القتال بنفسه قد غشيته الأعداء من كل جانب بالسيوف والرماح وآلة الحرب يتقعقع في الحديد قد بلغ مجهودا لا يعرف حيلة ولا يجد مهربا قد أدنف بالجراحات أو متشحطا بدمه تحت السنابك والأرجل يتمنى شربة من ماء أو نظرة إلى أهله وولده لا يقدر عليها وأنا في عافية من ذلك كله. فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين. إلهي وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح في ظلمات البحار وعواصف الرياح والأهوال والأمواج، يتوقع الغرق والهلاك، لا يقدر على حيلة، أو مبتلى بصائقة أو هدم أو حرق أو شرق أو خسف أو مسخ أو قذف، وأنا في عافية من ذلك كله. فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين. إلهي وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح مسافرا شاخصا عن أهله وولده، متحيرا في المفاوز، تائها مع الوحوش والبهائم والحوام، وحيدا فريدا لا يعرف حيلة ولا يهتدي سبيلا، أو متاضيا ببرد أو هار أو جوع أو عري أو غيره من الشدائد مما أنا منه خل، في عافية من ذلك كله. فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين. إلهي ومولاي وسيدي وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح فقيرا عائلا عاريا مملقا مخفقا مهجورا جائعا ظمآنا، ينتظر من يعود عليه بفضل أو عبد وجيه عندك، هو أوجه مني عندك وأشد عبادة لك، مغلولا مقهورا قد حمل ثقلا من تعب العناء وشدة العبودية وكلفة الرق وثقل الضريبة، أو مبتلى ببلاء شديد لا قبل له به إلا بمنك علي، وأنا المخدوم والمنعم والمعافى المكرم في عافية مما هو فيه. فلك الحمد على ذلك كله من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين. إلهي وسيدي، وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح شريدا طريدا، حيرانا متحيرا، جائعا خائفا في الصحاري والبراري، قد أهرقه الحر والبرد، وهو في ضر من العيش وضنك من الحياة وظل من المقام، ينظر إلى نفسه حسرة لا يقدر لها على ضر ولا نفع، وأنا خلو من ذلك كله بجودك وكرمك، فلك الحمد يا ربي من مقتدر لا يغلب، وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد، واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين، ولآلائك من الذاكرين، وارحمني برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. إلهي وسيدي، وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح عليلا مريضا سقيما مدنفا على فروش العلة وفي لباسها، يتقلب يمينا وشمالا، لا يعرف شيئا من لذة الطعام ولا من لذة الشراب، ينظر إلى نفسه حسرة لا يستطيع لها ضرا ولا نفعا، وأنا خلو من ذلك كله بجودك وكرمك، فلا إله إلا أنت سبحانك من مقتدر لا يغلب، وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد، واجعلني لك من العابدين، ولنعمائك من الشاكرين، ولآلائك من الذاكرين، وارحمني برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. مولاي وسيدي، وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح وقد دنا يومه من حتف، واهدق به ملك الموت في أعوانه، يعالج سكرات الموت وحياضا، تدور عيناه يمينا وشمالا، ينظر إلى أحبائه وأودائه وأخلائه، قد منع من الكلام وحجب عن الخطاب، ينظر إلى نفسه حسرة لا يستطيع لها ضرا ولا نفعا، من ذلك كله جودك وكرمك، فلا إله قدر لا يغلب، وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد، واجعلني لنعمائك من الذاكرين، وارحمني برحمة الراحمين. إلهي ومولاي وسيدي، وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح في مضايق الحبوس والسجون، وكربها وظلها وحديدها، يتدانه أعوانها وزبانيتها، فلا يدري أي وجه يوثل، ففي ضر من الضروع إلى أهله حسرة وأن
You can begin, brother.
وأنا خلو من ذلك كله بجودك وكرمك، فلا إله إلا أنت سبحانك من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لك من العابدين ولنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين، وارحمني برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. إلهي ومولاي وسيدي، وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح قد استمر عليه القضاء واحدق به البلاء، وفارق أوداءه وأحباءه وأخلاءه، وأمسى أسيرا حقيرا ذليلا في أيدي الكفار والأعداء، يتداولونه يمينا وشمالا، قد حسر في المطامير وثقل بالحديد، لا يرى شيئا من ضياء الدنيا ولا من روحها، ينظر إلى نفسه حسرة لا يستطيع لها ضرا ولا نفعا، وأنا خلو من ذلك كله بجودك وكرمك، فلا إله إلا أنت سبحانك من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لك من العابدين ولنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين، وارحمني برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. إلهي ومولاي وسيدي، وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح وقد اشتاق إلى الدنيا بالرغبة فيها، إلى أن خاطر بنفسه وماله حرصا منه عليها، قد ركب الفلك وكسرت به وهو في آفاق البحار وظلمها، ينظر إلى نفسه حسرة لا يقدر لها على ضر ولا نفع، وأنا خلو من ذلك كله بجودك وكرمك، فلا إله إلا أنت سبحانك من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد واجعلني لك من العابدين ولنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين، وارحمني برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. إلهي ومولاي وسيدي، وكم من عبد أمسى وأصبح قد استمر عليه القضاء وأهدق به البلاء والكفار والأعداء، وأخذته الرماه والسيوف والسهام والجدل صريعا، وقد شربت الأرض من دمه وأكلت السباع والطير من لحمه، وأنا خلو من ذلك كله بجودك وكرمك لا باستحقاق مني، يا لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك، من مقتدر لا يغلب وذي أنات لا يعجل. صل على محمد وآل محمد، واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين، وارحمني برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين، وعزتك يا كريم، لأطلبن مما لديك ولا ألحن عليك ولأمدن يدي نحوك مع جرمها إليك يا ربي، فبمن أعوذ وبمن ألوذ، لا أحد لي إلا أنت، أفتردني وأنت مؤولي وعليك متكلي، أسألك باسمك الذي وضعته على السماء فاستقلت وعلى الأرض فاستقرت وعلى الجبال فرست وعلى الليل فأظلم وعلى النهار فاستنار، أن تصلي على محمد وآل محمد، وأن تقضي لي حوائجي كلها وتغفر لي ذنوبي كلها صغيرها وكبيرها، وتوسع علي من الرزق ما تبلغني به شرف الدنيا والآخرة يا أرحم الراحمين. مولاي بك استعنت، فصل على محمد وآل محمد وعني، وبك استجرت فأجرني، وأغنني بطاعتك عن طاعة عبادك، وبمسألتك عن مسألة خلقك، وانقلني من ذل الفقر إلى عز الغنى، ومن ذل المعاصي إلى عز الطاعة، فقد فضلتني على كثير من خلقك جودا منك وكرما لا باستحقاق مني، إلهي فلك الحمد على ذلك كله. صل على محمد وآل محمد، واجعلني لنعمائك من الشاكرين ولآلائك من الذاكرين. سجد وجهي الذليل لوجهك العزيز الجليل، سجد وجهي البالي الفاني لوجهك الدائم الباقي، سجد وجهي الفقير لوجهك الغني الكبير، سجد وجهي وسمعي وبصري ولحمي ودمي وجلدي وعظمي وما قلت الأرض مني لله رب العالمين. اللهم عد على جهلي بحلمك، وعلى فقري بغناك، وعلى ذلي بعزك وسلطانك، وعلى ضعفي بقوتك، وعلى خوفي بأمنك، وعلى ذنوبي وخطاياي بعفوك ورحمتك يا رحمن يا رحيم. اللهم إني أدرأ بك في نهر السحاينا، وأعوذ بك من شره فاكفنيه بما كفيت به أنبياءك وأولياءك من خلقك وصالح عبادك، من فراعنة خلقك وطغاة عداتك وشر جميع خلقك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين، إنك على كل شيء قدير، وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
Thank you so much for the absolutely beautiful recitation. It's such a deep dua, and hopefully we can all contemplate on its meaning and apply it in our lives. Thank you, Brother Hussain. Before we begin with our discussion, I would like to let you know that there will be a question answer session towards the end. And if you have any questions, you can send them in the message, in the chat option for Zoom. And if there's any personal questions, you can send them directly to Sayed Zedi. And inshallah, they will try their best to answer your questions. Now I would like to invite Aga Ali Raza Razavi and Sayyid Ali Zaidi that they talk upon the content of Palestine, genocide and resistance. And I should mention that we're extremely grateful for their time that they've taken out to be with us here today and to talk about this extremely important issue. Whenever you're ready.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, dear listeners, to everyone who's logged on. On behalf of FNC, I would like to welcome all of you, and also would like to welcome my dear friend, my dear respected guest, Sayyid Agha Ali Raza. Just as a brief introduction, Sayyid Agha Ali Raza did his studies in Islamabad up to high school. After that, he got his degree in business from IBA in Karachi and has been studying in the Hawza Ilmiya of Qom since 2007. He is now attending Dars Kharij and pursuing his PhD in Islamic Studies. So thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure to have you.
But there's an echo, so if you can fix that.
Yeah, I think it should be okay now.
Okay, perfect.
So inshallah, again, sorry about that. Thank you for joining us. Inshallah, we'll be starting our discussion. So as all of you know, that on October 7th, basically this conflict that inshallah we'd like to talk about today started on October 7th. Since then, there is a genocide that's been going on. The Palestinians have been ruthlessly bombing. There's carpet bombing going on. There've been people in Gaza, the Palestinians have been told to leave to different parts of the Gaza Strip, but the bombing continues in those parts where they were asked to leave to as well. All basic necessities have been cut off. No medical aid, no food, no electricity, no fuel. Hospitals have run out of basic necessities, have run out of basic resources to be able to save the oppressed, the ones who are injured. There, according to the latest numbers, there's almost 4,500 people who have died since October 7th. So in 2 weeks, almost 4,500 people who have died. almost 2,000 or 1,800 of those are children and about 1,000 women. So this is what's going on, the most heinous crimes. We can see that most of us have been following the news. So inshallah, what I would like to do today, inshallah, is try to get some sort of perspective from Agha Sayyid Agha Ali Raza over here to be able to understand what our responsibility is. There's when we look at mainstream media, there's a lot of news, there's a lot of different narratives, there's a lot of propaganda with regards to this issue. It seems like it always is the case that the oppressor is always painted as the victim. So inshallah, we're hoping that getting a perspective on the facts of what's going on based on the Islamic ideology, what does Islam tell us about this perspective, about this issue and some of the issues that pertain to this conflict right now. So one of the things that we hear and we see in the world right now is that it's a central issue right now. Other than that, the way the media works and the way the news works is that a topic gets hot and then people kind of forget about it and goes into the background. This is not a new issue. This is an issue that's been going on for decades and decades. Yet you and I, we get on with our lives as if it doesn't exist. And when it comes to the forefront, then we care about it. Other than that, we forget about it. The leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has mentioned that this is one of those core issues of the Islamic world. So this is from the perspective, he's not the only one. There are other Maraja, there are other scholars that have mentioned it. Sayyid Sistani has issued a statement recently calling for all Muslims to come to help the Palestinians, to not sit back, not be quiet about this issue, and other scholars as well, other than the perspective of just because a marja of ours or a scholar of ours, if you could shed some light on what makes this issue, or what was maybe the thought process behind, is it something that just exaggerated? We wouldn't expect that from the leaders, from the Maraja, to just exaggerate something. So if you could shed some light on this, why this issue would be called one of those core or central issues of the Islamic world.
Inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu ala al-Husayn wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn wa ala awlad al-Husayn wa ala ashab al-Husayn wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before going into that, the reason why I recited this supplication right in the beginning is because whenever you're talking about the oppressed, one of the things that we have been taught in the school of the Ahlul Bayt is to remember Abu Abdullah alayhi salam as the Imam of the oppressed. And therefore this parallel that creates itself between the issue of Karbala and oppressed people all over the world throughout history. So that is something that we need to remember, and it is part of the essential ethos, especially of the school of thought of the Ahlul Bayt, the Shia. So when we talk about the Palestinian issue, no matter what yardstick you are measuring it by, it is the first and the foremost issue right now in the world. And this is not just right now. Every time it flares up, every time the conflict flares up, you see, if you just take, for example, the media, the mainstream media, the highly biased, prejudiced mainstream media, even if you take that as a yardstick, you see that this is the first news that is blazing up everywhere. So no one can deny the importance of the issue. No one can deny that this issue takes center stage. Whenever it comes up, it takes center stage. But if you look at the issue itself, there are several ways, there are in fact at least 10 ways, if I'm counting correctly, to look at the issue and analyze it.
From different perspectives.
From different perspectives. You can look at it from the perspective of history, from the dimension of history. You can look at it from the angle of geopolitics, why this is important, geopolitically speaking. Why are these several powers all over the world kind of working through this conflict in a proxy manner? You can look at it from the point of view of a humanitarian issue. You can look at it from the point of view of an issue of legality, of international law, from the perspective of the Geneva Convention, from the perspective of laws of war which are internationally recognized. Then you can also look at it from the point of view of the Quran, of the narrative of the Quran, of how divine precedents within the Quran, divine laws and universal laws of history are playing out in this conflict. Another dimension of looking at it is the dimension of Islamic jurisprudence. What does Islamic law say about this conflict? There we talk about how legitimacy in terms of who owns the land, where we need to resist, where we need to fight, is marked out and clearly defined by the Sharia of the Ahl al-Bayt.
So just to understand, it's not the case that Islamic law would say Palestine, Israel.
No,
but the principles that we can extract from Islamic
like
law
any place,
and how it would be applied.
Like if you open the Tawzi'ul Masail, any practicing Muslim, any practicing Shia especially, if you open up those books of Fatawa, you'll see that all of the principles there, all of the laws there are in the general sense, right? So they never talk about particulars, but it is your intellect that takes this and sees that this applies to this issue, right? So we can look at it from the point of view of Islamic jurisprudence, and then we can also look at it from the point of view of the logic that we find within the narrated traditions of the Ahl al-Bayt about the end times, about Imam Mahdi Ajallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif. So this demonstrates that this is an expansive issue, and dealing with it in an exhaustive, comprehensive manner isn't something that you can do just in a session or two. It requires our audience to dwell into this proactively, read about it, and therefore inshallah also to the ulama. But the point that I'm trying to make is that much of this information can be easily accessed, especially in today's world, through the internet. There are websites, there are activists working all over the place, there are people across the board, Muslims, Jews, Christians, people who do not attribute themselves to a denomination. All of them are working for, many of them are working for the rights of Palestine, and you have lectures on this, you have material on this online that people can access.
Perhaps one of the issues, sorry to interrupt, but one of the issues that me myself sometimes face and an average person would face, you mentioned all of it's on the internet. Maybe sometimes that is the issue, that there's so much
clutter on the
information
internet.
and clutter on the internet that it's very difficult to be able to, like a person who just listens to the mainstream media, it's almost like that's the narrative that they start believing in. And then if they hear something that differs from that, that's almost like shut down as if it might be a conspiracy theory or...
Absolutely. So this is why we need to touch upon all of these issues, but our main perspective will be the perspective of what the Quran and the Sunnah of the Ahl al-Bayt it says about the issue and what they teach us, because as a scholar of Islam and as a student myself, we need to look at this from the point of view of how God wants us to look at this. And at the same time, obviously, the evidence on the ground, it helps us emphasize and drive the point in at many times. So the question that you raised right in the beginning was why this issue takes centrality amongst all these other issues that the Muslim Ummah has. So first of all, it's not just an issue of the Muslim Ummah. It is an issue of all the Mustaz'afin. This is a terminology used by Imam Khomeini, and it is a terminology taken from the Quran, because istiz'af is talked about in the Quran in several places. All the downtrodden, oppressed people of the world, which is the huge majority of humanity, this is the central issue for all of them. Now the question that comes about is that how do you say that this issue, which is kind of isolated in the Middle East, isolated between the Arabs and the Zionist occupiers, how does this apply to maybe people in Africa? How does this apply to people in South America? How does it apply to people living in the United States?
Why even go that far, right? We're Pakistani. I might argue with you, or someone Pakistani might stand up and be like, Maulana, what are you talking about? For me, Kashmir, the Kashmir issues are more of an issue. Why are you saying this is the central issue? If right now or later on, if you could shed some light on that.
Or even the issues that we have, like that are closer to home, right? Issues of poverty, issues, because many times this fallacy is raised. You cannot even manage your own country. You have so many crises. Why care about an Arab issue, right? So this is one of the fallacies that comes up in the media, and it basically preoccupies people's minds. The key point to remember here, and I'm obviously the answer that I'm trying to give here is in general taken from the statements of Imam Khomeini and Imam Khamenei. So the idea to remember here is that there is a commonality between all these instances of oppression. Let's not even go towards Kashmir. We'll go towards that later on. Let's take the issues that we have on the ground in many of these third world countries. You have corruption, you have mismanagement, you have the exploitation of resources, you have the exploitation of the citizenry, you have the usurpation of the rights of the citizenry. If you look behind the scenes, what is perpetuating this situation? And this is one of the things that Imam Khomeini taught the Iranian people before the revolution. When people would want to express their anger towards oppression and tyranny, Imam Khomeini would say that if you want to scream, scream at the head of the serpent. Right? Scream at that structure, that international structure that is helping to perpetuate these problems. Right? And we'll go into the details momentarily.
So suggesting that it's all connected, perhaps.
Exactly. So this is all connected. Right now, maybe like a decade ago or two, if you would say this, people would say, oh, he's talking about conspiracy theories, he's talking about some shady group that is controlling everything from the background. But now, alhamdulillah, the basira of people, their insight has grown so much that in the heartland of the West, right, from people who are not Muslims, have nothing to do with Islam, you saw that slogan of the 1% filled up the media. Everyone found out about the 1%. It became the rallying call for people who are oppressed, especially in the Western world, right? And then when you start looking at the evidence, you see that the oligarchy that controls Western society, the oligarchy that controls these rich millionaires who are the 1% of society, they control politics in the United States, they control politics in Canada, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world, and also in the European Union. When you look at them, you see that wherever you have oppression going on, if you have African Americans, if you have the indigenous people issue in the United States or in Australia, in other places, if you have oppression of the Hispanics, if you have oppression and dictatorial regimes perpetuated in South America, if you have dictatorial regimes in the Arab world, if you have dictatorial regimes in Eastern Europe, if you have, for example, the regime of Hindutva, of right-wing Hindu nationalism, genocidal nationalism in India right now, behind all of these people, and very overtly, not in a covert manner, you see that you have especially the United States government involved. And it's bipartisan as well. It's not something about Republicans and Democrats. It's not about the right wing and the left wing. It is a common issue, right? Especially when it comes to Israel. Like Israel is the red line, right? No matter what party you belong to in the United States or in the United Kingdoms, if you want to win an election, if you want to be in office, you need to be on board with the Zionist lobbies. And again, when we're using this word Zionist, this is again like around 20 years ago, 25 years ago, if you would use this word, everyone would again like shrug and say, oh, again, we're talking about conspiracy theories. But now it's out in the open. They call themselves Zionists. They have no shame about it anymore, right? So if you look at, for example, just one example which is kind of relevant to Pakistanis as well, because when we talk about the labor leader in the United Kingdoms, Corbyn, Jeremy Corbyn, right? If I remember his name correctly, he was people knew him in Pakistan because he would talk about the Kashmir issue, right? And he would talk about issues of the oppressed around the world. But because of his criticism of Israel, he was basically thrown out of the Labour Party. He was made a person who is of no relevance anymore, right? And you have the same thing going on in the United States as well and other places. So without diverging into different tangents, the core issue here is that wherever you have tyranny around the world, in 99.9% of the cases, you can track it back very easily from mainstream sources of research back to the oligarchs, who are the Zionist oligarchs, who are controlling basic policy making in these big Western powers. So for example, if you look at Kashmir, right, so something that is very close to heart for the Pakistani population, right, if you look at Kashmir, recently Kashmir was deprived of its special status within the Indian constitution. Who did this? The extreme right-wing Modi government, who supports very openly the Modi government, and who do the Modi government, the Hindutva government, align with in terms of the Palestinian conflict? Israel. Even surveillance devices and much of the technology used within Kashmir to suppress the people was provided to the Indian government, as well as training by the Israeli administration, by their secret services, by their intelligence wing and their technology development infrastructure. If you go a little back in history, another main big issue in contemporary history is South America, of apartheid, right? Which is like one of
Africa.
South Africa.
Right.
So you have Nelson Mandela, you have here the fight against apartheid there, and again you see that despite a consensus amongst the justice loving people of the world, all of them rallying behind Nelson Mandela and his movement, Israel and people within the British government and the American government would stand with the apartheid right to the last moment, to the point that when basically public opinion became so opposed to the apartheid government that they had no choice but to move in the other direction. So again you see Israel, its fingerprints all over this issue as well.
How long has this been going on? Right now, when you hear a lot of people, especially the Palestinian activists or even general people, when they're talking about this, they always talk about 75 years, because it's about, I think, 75 years since independence, and they say it's 75 years the Palestinian people have been oppressed. Is it really just 75 years? These things that you're talking about, are the roots further back?
The roots are they go back really in history, right?
So how far away?
If you're talking about, for example, Palestine, before we talk about Palestine itself, let's look from a Quranic perspective, sure, right? So if you read the Quran from a perspective of understanding Quranic sociology, because this is universal sociology, it's not something that will change, right? You see that you have this character of people like Fir'aun throughout history, and it repeats itself. It's a cycle. Innahu tagha, someone who transgresses is a taghut. Right. Someone who has this mentality, who says, Ana rabbukumul ala, I am your greatest Lord, I am your sovereign, I own you. Right. And if you remember the story in the Quran, it is when the sorcerers that he brought in to oppose Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, when they embraced the true religion, it was the Pharaoh's opinion that how dare you exercise free will? How dare you embrace something without asking me for permission first? Right. Ana rabbukumul ala. I not only own your bodies, your land, your property, I own your volition, I own your free will, I own your soul, your mind. See? So this idea of being greater, like sitting on the throne of God and being like God and trying to usurp God's authority on earth, is something that has gone on throughout history, and it repeats itself. You
thinking that you're above and beyond everyone
absolutely
else.
I mean, one of the traditions of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, they list the Taghawit, the Taghut. They list how Fir'aun was one of them, Namrud was one of them, and then when it comes closer to the time of the Prophet, they talk about, for example, Abi Sufyan, and then they talk about Muawiyah and so on and so forth, right? So you always have this antithesis to justice, to true human values throughout history. This is part of the philosophy of history. This goes back to the question of why Satan exists, right? Because just so that we don't leave this question totally unanswered, the philosophy that the ulama talk about, and people who write commentaries on the Quran by looking at it from the point of view of the Ahlul Bayt, the core philosophy of their being evil is for human beings to reach their ultimate potential, because through exercising their free will and choosing to be on the right side, they reach moral excellence. So anyway, so this has gone on forever. and the names change, right? So for example, when you look at the Quran talks about the Yahud, right? And we see the Quran, when it talks about the Yahud, it's not talking about all the Jews, and we'll inshallah come back to that later on. But the names change. Sometimes it's colonialism, sometimes it's imperialism, sometimes it's this, that. Now it is Zionism, right? That is the name that they have chosen for themselves right now. But the names don't really matter. It is the substance that matters. Sure. The substance isn't changing. So if you apply this to the Palestinian issue, you find that in if you look at before 1920s, right? You look at the creation of the World Zionist Council. You see Theodor Herzl. He comes up, before him another journalist comes up with the idea, coins the name, and then he becomes the standard bearer of this movement. Almost immediately you find the oligarchs looking at this idea and saying, this can be very profitable, this helps us. And they come on board. So the Rothschilds in Britain, you see Lord Balfour in Britain, everyone coming on board, right? And
the famous Balfour Declaration.
Exactly.
1917, I believe.
Exactly. So you have that, and then that is a declaration that explicitly says that we're going to just chop this place up as if we own it and give it to the so-called Jewish people, for example.
So it wasn't even Jewish, from what I understand correctly. The Balfour Declaration was from Balfour, who was the foreign minister of the United Kingdom of Britain, and he wrote it to
for Rothschild,
who is part of the Zionist organization.
Of the Zionist organization, right? And again, we need to be very clear. Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. We'll come back to this again momentarily. But essentially, it is a secular movement. It is a secular movement that wants to exploit the mentality of the Jewish religion, the baggage, the cultural baggage of the Jewish religion, and just like any other terrorist organization, it's an ideology. And
we have Zionist Christians as well.
Exactly, we have Zionist Christians. We even though the term isn't used, we have Zionist Muslims. We have Zionist Hindus right now, right? We have Zionist Buddhists as well. So it is not something that is restricted to the Jews. Anyone who ascribes to this ideology that a certain minority, micro-minority, should be, because they have power, because they have money, they should have the sole right to rule over the world and do as they may, no matter what happens. This in itself is Zionism. Inshallah, we'll talk later on about how Quran talks about the substance of this ideology. So coming back to your question, if you look at the issue of Palestine itself, so at least from the 1920s, and there has been immigration to this land because the United Kingdom was, in one way or the other, in control of the territory. There was planned immigration to this land from the 1920s.
Even before that, right?
Exactly.
It was at the end of the First World War.
Exactly. It started right at the end of the First World War.
I believe there was like 3 different sort of agreements that Britain had. One was the Balfour Declaration with the Jewish organization. Then there was that Sykes-Picot, which was the British and the French.
To cut up the Middle East.
And then there was another one. There was the Hussein McMahon correspondence, which was again between I believe
Sharif Hussein.
It was the Emir of Mecca
Sharif Hussein,
with the representative of Britain in Egypt.
So it was a triple play basically.
And they were all contradictory.
So
they're promising different people different things.
When they sent Lawrence of Arabia, which everyone knows about because of the movie, when they sent him as an advisor to Sharif Hussein and his family, the British government promised that if you rise up against the Ottoman Empire and you have this insurrection, we will give this to you. We will give this entire territory to you.
An independent Arab state.
Exactly, right? And then on the other hand, they were at the same time, they were stabbing him in the back, cutting up Iraq into a different territory, Jordan into a different territory. You had the Levant, and so on and so forth, right? This was the Sykes-Picot, which was very similar to how they had cut up Africa. If you even look at the map of Africa, you see that they have actually cut it up like with a scale, like it's absolutely unnatural borders, which have created so much conflict later on. So they did this, and at the same time, behind the scenes, there was this the Balfour Declaration, which said that we are basically going to give this land out to the Zionists. And one of the interesting things here is that when the British left Palestine, the scenario that they had created was that Jewish groups were fighting them, in a manner of speaking. So you had, for example, they would say that they are Jewish terrorist groups, which is interesting. Like even in the British media at that time, they were labeled terrorist, right? So these Zionist terrorist groups were allowed, as far as I understand, to bomb and even to murder some of the British soldiers. Therefore, to create a narrative of a flow to the idea that we are going to move out of Palestine and we have no other choice and we need to.
So basically, whoever's against me is the terrorist.
Yeah, whoever is against me.
50 years ago, 100 years ago, it was the same group of people who now are the victims.
Even though, as I was trying to like imply, and now I'll say it explicitly, this was all a creation of a scenario because they needed justification to get out of there, right? So they had already signed a declaration with the Zionists. They were going to leave it for them anyway, right? So it was just a scenario in order to create a public opinion so as to easily come out, because obviously Christians believe in the Holy Land as well, right?
Right. So it started with the First World War, around there. It was at the end of the Second World War where they had made a mess out of it.
Absolutely.
And that's when they gifted it to the Holy United Nations.
Exactly.
And we know where it went from there.
The day that the British pulled out, Ben Gurion and his council, they met in a museum in Jerusalem, I believe, and they declared the new state of Israel. Right?
1948.
And as Biden just said right now, just a few days ago, he said 17 minutes after this declaration, they were the first country to recognize Israel, if I'm not getting that, if I'm getting that correct. But it was an unprecedented thing to do. Like it was almost as if all of the pieces on the chessboard were already ready.
So it's truly not from 75 years ago,
No.
but from perhaps the late
20th century.
19th century.
And as I tried to
Late
emphasize,
19th
this is not even before that, because this flow within history is something that has always been there. Like if you had the usurpation by the Umayyads, if you had the usurpation by the Abbasids, if you had the usurpation by other tyrants in history, this is just one more usurpation that has happened. But another interesting point here is that when you just as people try to say that this is just 75 years old, there is this other narrative which clings on to 1967, right? The conflict did not start in 1967. That is even a worse injustice. One of the essential differences between, for example, the PLO and Islamic movements such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad is that they talk about the totality of the Palestinian land and about the integrity, the territorial integrity of the entire country. And interestingly, Hamas, when it was formed, if you look at the first declaration that Hamas had, its first constitution, it talks about fighting the Jews, because again the whole the choice of words wasn't there at that time. If you go back in history, you go back to that time, really words weren't used with that kind of a political correctness, so as to speak, right? So but at the same time you can see what their intentions are. They say that we will fight the Jews, cleanse our land from this occupation, and then as a solution they say that this will be one country, Palestine, where even the indigenous Jews will be given their rights. So you can see that this is again going back to the Quranic vision of how to deal with different religions and how democratic, if I were to use that word.
Basically, what in other words, what they want to do is undo these Western policies, the Zionist policies. We just want to go back to what it was 50, 60 years ago.
Absolutely. Palestine is probably one of the few last remnants of colonial crimes by the Western governments. Right? If colonialism had not happened, if that usurpation of the lands of indigenous people had not happened, you would not have had a Zionist entity in the area, you would not have had a Palestinian resistance, because there would have been no reason to do so. And the important point here to remember is that before this entire Zionist project, Jews, Christians and Muslims lived peacefully in this land
For centuries.
Even I forget what her name was, this the famous prime minister of we can look this up later because sometimes I forget names. This famous prime minister of Israel, of the entity called Israel, who is considered to be their Iron Lady, right in the beginning of their history. She herself, in one of the clips that is going around right now as well, and it is available on video, in an interview she shows the interviewer her passport as a citizen of Palestine. Palestine as an entity before the Israeli regime, in itself, in the way it worked, in the culture that this country had, always welcomed this fabric of having different religious people because of the nature of the Holy Land.
Right.
See, Jerusalem was always the home of indigenous Jews, indigenous Muslims, and indigenous Christians.
Right.
Yes, whenever someone invades from the outside, be it crusaders in the medieval times, or be it Zionists now, foreigners who want to occupy this land, then there will be resistance. But indigenous people, they have never had problems with one another in terms of their religion. In fact, one of the hallmarks of Muslim rule, there might have been problems with the Muslim civilization in other places, and obviously the Shia school of thought is a great critic of many of the things that Muslim kings and monarchs have done throughout history. But in terms of how Palestine was managed, there was never an issue of anti-Semitism in, even the word is wrong because we too are like, for example, Hashemis, we are Semites as well. But there was never an issue of anti-Semitism in the Holy Land before Zionism. So all of these narratives have been created by the same project. The hatred has been created by the same project. You see, the hatred, just like in apartheid era, the hatred between the Africans, the indigenous Africans and the white population there, right? What was that a consequence of? It was the consequence of tyranny, of the apartheid regime. It is Zionism and the essence of the Israeli regime that creates hatred, creates violence, creates the groundworks for this entire genocide.
So if you look at the mainstream, right, in light of this discussion and the other aspects perhaps they had mentioned, if you look at mainstream media, it seems like people like, you know, Piers Morgan and these kind of people and the other, you know, popular people who have interviews and whatnot, it seems like the first thing they want from whoever they have, especially from the pro-Palestinian side, is like they want them to condemn Hamas first. Is that something that's fair? Is that being, you know, me being fair? That yes, Hamas did, you know, committed a crime, and therefore I should condemn Hamas. How would you look at this? From like, is it our responsibility as Muslims, as you know, law-abiding, good people, people who are fair in their perspective? Should we have to condemn Hamas? Is that something that we should
Absolutely
do? We
not.
have to do?
Absolutely not.
Not.
Absolutely not. In the school of the Ahlul Bayt, we never condemn the oppressor. We never condemn the resistance fighters. Right?
The oppressed.
The oppressors, the oppressed, and the resistance fighters. Right? Obviously, within the parameters of Islamic law. If, for example, a resistance movement somewhere in the world goes out of the way, like many resistance movements in South America, for example, because they were communists in terms of ideology, if they go and they start killing people irrationally, then we will condemn that, right? But when we are talking within the perimeter of Islamic law, within the perimeter of Islamic morality, which is universal human morality, because there is no subjectivity to this issue, we do not condemn Hamas. Why do we not condemn Hamas? First of all, let's talk about why they want you to condemn Hamas. If you look at the mainstream philosophy that dictates the entire structure of life within the Western society, it is a philosophy which is built upon subjectivity, a philosophy that is based upon the fact that there are no constant moral standpoints, right? So something can be right today, it can be wrong tomorrow because the majority says that it is so, right? Then there is no objectivity in terms of there being a God, there being divine morality, divine law, right? So in that neo-humanism, they have come up with this narrative which says that violence is wrong across the board, right? And this has been cooking for ages. Like if you look at one of the fundamental deviances within Christian theology, which according to the Quran, obviously Christianity did not remain that pure Christianity as it should have been, as taught by Hazrat Isa alayhi salam. One of those deviant ideas was that if the oppressor comes in and slaps you on the right cheek, present him your left cheek. Right? And Imam Khomeini famously said that if Hazrat Isa was alive right now, he would answer that first slap before you could even think about that second slap, right? Because as the principle within Islam says, La tuzlim wa la tuzlam. Do not oppress and do not be the oppressed. Do not oppress and do not be oppressed. Right? So we stand with the resistance fighters, and we do not stand with the propaganda of mainstream media. If we go back to what we were talking about just moments ago, there's something that I would like to talk about. It's called the economy of trust. One of the issues that we have in our societies right now is that people unconsciously or subconsciously, or in terms of some sort of a social inertia, have invested their trust in people, organizations, institutions, media outlets who do not deserve this trust. Let me explain this a little bit. 99% of what we do in our lives requires a specialist knowledge. When our cars break down, when we are sick, when we need to send our children to school, we require specialized knowledge, right? And we do not have that specialized knowledge. The masses of the world do not have specialized knowledge. They do not have the time or the motivation to go after that. So they must go towards specialists who they perceive to be specialists and trust their opinion.
Rely on others.
Rely upon others, right? And that is one of the basic principles of why we have taqleed in Islam. Why we need to rely upon the maraja for those specialized fatwa, right? The same is true for social issues. I, as a person living in Pakistan, in India, in the United States, in the United Kingdoms, anywhere in the world, I cannot go out, be on the ground and absorb all the particular details and then have this analytical framework to come with an honest and true and objective opinion about issues. So I need to trust media outlets, right? Unfortunately, when we're not looking at the background of these media outlets, we're not looking at the fact that the same oligarchs who are controlling policy, who are Zionists themselves, are also the owners of these media outlets. And this isn't, again, this is not a conspiracy theory. They even boast about it on mainstream media, right? They boast about it, like they say that, yes, we own everything, right? We own the entirety of Hollywood. Right? So this is not something that the cat is out of the box, right? It's yeah. So the issue here is that we need to learn where to invest our trust. When we do not learn where to invest our trust, according to what the Quran says, for example, the Quran in one of the verses, famous verses, it says that when a fasik comes to you, do not trust his opinion, do not trust the news that he is giving you. إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. And this is fasik, a Muslim who commits sins. Now just look at the logic there. If it's not a Muslim, if it's part of the enemy infrastructure, this person is part of the enemy infrastructure, of the enemy civilization, of the enemy power structure, their hierarchy, how would you be allowed to accept their opinion on face value? Obviously you won't be able to do that. And the basic rationality behind that is that news is always political in nature. News is given to you not fi sabilillah, because they like just imagine like one of these oligarchs sitting and they're saying that, okay, we need to create these international news agencies because the poor people of the world do not know what's going on. These are people who have, like, for every cent, for every moment they invest, they want a turnover, they want profit, right? So if you look at the history of the BBC, and there are documentaries online as well, if you just look at the history of the BBC, you see how the BBC has been an active wing of British foreign policy throughout history, throughout any modern history, since its inception, right? So that is the role played by these organizations, and now we are receiving news from them and we are taking it at face value.
Which makes sense from that perspective, right? If it's an organization, if it's an institution that sees itself ideology, that sees itself above others, and it wants to control the minds and enslave the minds. I mean, what? It's genius.
It's genius. But in fact, it should have been something that we were doing. If we had the resources, we should have been doing this for righteous purposes, obviously. But they, from a rational point of view, if someone wants to control the minds and hearts of the people of the world and control public opinion, control perspectives, which they call perspective management, right? If they want to control this, in order to control their economies, in order to control their politics, then they must have huge institutions that are peddled out, that are sold to the people as reliable institutions. I remember when we used to study marketing back at university, they talked about the personality of organizations. So for example, if you were talking about IBM, you would say that this is like lightning. So there was this humanized personality of each brand name, right? So BBC, for the average Pakistani, especially the educated Pakistani that listens to English media, for example, the BBC, oh, absolutely reliable. An old, reliable man sitting with his three-piece suit with a pipe in his hand, telling you the truth without any strings attached. The CNN is a younger, more vibrant version of this old man, right? And if anything is said against the narrative being peddled out by them, then it is a conspiracy theory.
So it's almost like BBC, like the British were ruling the subcontinent, India and Pakistan, and now they're like, okay, you know what? We're going to give you independence, but we're still going to control your minds.
Yeah, we're going to outsource.
That's what was happening, right? Even in the villages and in the cities. Even if they didn't have a TV, they were listening to what?
BBC, the radio, right? And then you see BBC has the Urdu service, it has the Farsi service, it has the in Afghanistan it has the Dari service. It has so many local language services that you can tune into. Why is this happening? Is this all altruistic in nature? Do they have this amazing thirst to inform the people of the world? No, they want to control public opinion and form public opinion.
Can I interrupt your thought just so I don't forget this? So what would you suggest for an average person out there? Where do they go? The easiest places to go is Fox News, CNN, BBC. Where do we go to get the news where we can at least get a different perspective?
First of all, when you look at this problem, and in fact, let me add one more detail to the problem itself. It's not just about BBC and the CNN, right? If you look at local media in Pakistan and places like Pakistan, this is like a principle all over the place. Even in India is the same thing. If you look at local establishments, like for example, you look at the Dawn newspaper, you look at the Geo News, you look at all of these other outlets. When it comes to international news, who do they fall back on? Where do they take their narratives from? It's either Reuters or it's one of the other huge institutions, right? So sometimes when it's a very big issue, they try to send in people themselves, but normally it's just regurgitating and recycling that same opinion. Even the headlines aren't changed. If you look at the Reuters website and you look at, for example, the Dawn newspaper, you see that the same idea, the same thing has been copy pasted. So it's not just about local news versus international news. It's about the penetration of this monopoly of information deep into our societies. So what is the solution? First of all, the solution is that people should demand from their scholars to enlighten them about these issues, right? One of the major duties of the scholars, and not just from the point of view of the Islamic Revolution and so on and so forth, this is a Quranic principle. One of the major duties of Islamic scholars is to inform the Islamic nation, especially the Islamic nation, and then the Mustazafin, the downtrodden all over the world, about the truth of what is going on, right? The second solution is, especially today, we are blessed by the fact that there are alternates as well. So for example, you have Press TV. For example, you have even Al Jazeera can be seen as part of this puzzle, even though they have certain narratives.
Part of which puzzle?
The puzzle of an alternate media. If you don't want to be tunnel visioned by Western mainstream media or media controlled by Western mainstream media. And remember, when we say control, we're not talking about active control. This is in most of the cases, this is a societal issue. It's the fact that people are, as Malcolm X says, they are house slaves. They are, there's this, because many of the audience would understand Urdu, Habib Jalib has this beautiful verse. He says, apne kharch pe hain qaid, log tere raj mein. So we are prisoners to this civilization by our own volition, and we love it. Many of us love it because it makes us feel part of the mainstream, makes us feel. There was this main page of the Time magazine many years ago when I was at university. It showed the picture of a girl in Lahore, and the main title was "New York is my second home." This is perspective, the management of perception, right? It makes you feel alien in your own country, makes you feel at home in some other country, right? And as I said, you should, the audience should look up this terminology from Malcolm X. He talks about field slaves. He uses the word nigger because in that environment it was used. It's not used right now, it's considered derogatory. He talks about the field nigger and the house nigger, and he talks about the two competing psychologies. The house nigger is someone who is totally submitted, like has this psychological and emotional kind of hostage state to his own captors, right? It's called the Stockholm syndrome as well, like someone who's kidnapped. Anyway, so if you're talking about solutions, you right now, maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, your hands were truly empty. It was difficult to come with an alternate perspective. But right now you have mainstream channels, you have Press TV in English, you have Al Jazeera in English, you have Al Mayadeen, it has an English website. Then you have places like informationclearinghouse.info, which has been going on for at least, like I think 20 years now. And this is part of, this is from the West itself, people who are fighting for an alternate voice in the West. Then, and you have other sources as well. We can like maybe put this up on on social media as well, like make a list and be able to allow our audience to be able to access these sites. So we do have alternates, but the first step towards those alternates is to realize that we are in this bubble. If I were to quote Hollywood, the first step to come out of the matrix is to realize that you're inside the software, right? So you need to, something that our Urafa call yaqza, the awakening, right? To realize that you are inside this bubble of information monopoly, of you are being programmed in a manner so that your behavior can be of a certain sort. So that is one of the ways of how we can start being objective towards. And we're not asking people not to look at BBC, especially people who are academically strong. They should look at the BBC, they should look at mainstream media and look at alternative media as well. Right. And develop the ability to be able to come to an objective opinion.
To be able to sift through.
Exactly.
So it's almost important after a certain stage to be able to look.
One of the interesting things that happens almost every 5 years, 6 years is you have crises, so-called crises in Iran, and then you have this mainstream media peddling a narrative that such and such has happened in Iran, and we who are living here and we are out in the street, we are out with the people, we see no, it's completely the other thing around, right?
And it's amazing.
And
how
it's amazing, exactly.
People you know personally, and you would think they're very like
educated and informed.
Yeah, just like informed people and rational people. Yeah. And they almost have this perspective like it's just unlivable over there.
Like some Taliban state, like right?
It really does. Yeah. And so, I tell them
that tells you the power of the of media. And you must understand there are two documentaries I'd like to suggest here and recommend to our audience. One is called The Corporation, and it in fact has two parts right now, the Corporation 1 and Corporation 2. It talks about how the oligarchy works, right? The mentality of the oligarchy. And then there's another famous documentary, it's called Century of the Self. And certain parts of that documentary, they talk about perspective, how perspectives are managed, how they are manipulated. So even within the United States itself, within the feminist movement of the United States, and this is a BBC documentary. So like this is like from them themselves, so it is like it is a confirmation. It's absolutely true.
It's true.
Like, and there are no objections to it. So that will show you the power, because there's a lot of clinical psychology and research that is at the background of all these activities. It's not just like two people coming up and just like starting giving out lies in the media.
It's planned out, right?
It's planned out.
Even with the entire inception of the country, we see that it started maybe late in the 19th century, then it took almost 50, 60 years
Exactly.
for it to reach.
Khutuwat al-shaitan.
And then after that, you know that famous sort of image where it shows the Palestinian map and the Jewish settlements
keeps becoming smaller and
the Jewish
smaller.
settlements initially were like less than maybe about 7 to 10%. And then now it's completely flipped in terms of area and in terms of population. It used to be maybe like, you know, a few percent and the rest were Muslims, and now it's like beyond 50% that are.
Absolutely.
So it's just slowly, and even right now, right, when we talked about Gaza, and we talked about like the atrocities that are going on over there. So it's one thing to say, you know, your country's over there, my country's over here, and I'm going to come bomb you. But this is worse than that.
Absolutely.
You're not even free in your supposed country.
Absolutely.
You're like blocked from every side.
Absolutely.
As they call it, the world's largest open air prison.
Open air prison. And this isn't some exaggeration. When you talk about Gaza, and the same is true for the West Bank as well, but Gaza is especially, like, it is an extreme case. It is completely surrounded from all sides. The Israeli regime completely control all things that go in and go out, even electricity, even water, even gas.
As we see, they cut everything off.
They cut everything off right now. To understand how extreme the issue is, the amount of food that is sent in is determined on a calorie counter. So it's not just like, okay, send in like so many tons of food. No. They calculate the average amount of calories needed by a person in a day.
Just to keep them alive.
Just to keep them alive, right? So if for example, their experience of some of these Zionists in concentration camps during the Nazi regime was something that they have turned into what they hated, right?
It's almost like
this is worse than, at least their calories are counted.
And the interesting thing is, there were resistance back there as well, according to most narrations. That when they were kind of oppressed, right?
Absolutely.
Supposedly, you know, with that whatever conditions that were mentioned, the same people say that, you know, there were revolts and there was resistance against that.
Absolutely.
Which is almost natural if someone is being oppressed.
Inshallah, we'll get on to the different kinds of oppression that is going on in Palestine, but since you mentioned this is a good place to kind of go towards the difference between a Jew and a Zionist. First, let's go back to the Quran, because we want to look at everything from the Quran, right?
So let me just add another question before
absolutely.
So just because I criticize Israel right now, right? Am I an anti-Semite? Because that's the propaganda, right? You say, you peep a word. You're losing your contracts, you're losing your jobs, you're losing your admissions into school, you're losing everything with just a small peep.
Our brothers and sisters in the audience, one of the key words that they should search online, because obviously we can't give them all the details in this small session, right? Short session. They should look up historical revisionism. This is an academic field that seeks to revise, go back, revisit historical records on different issues, and then come up to a non-politicized, objective opinion of what happened. Right? They should look this up.
Historical revisionism.
They should look at it up and see what people in this field, what they said about Zionism, what they said about the Holocaust, and at the same time they should look up Holocaust denial, right? Just to see how many Jews have been accused of it. A truckload of Jews who were children of people who were Holocaust survivors, right, have been banished out of their communities, have died in impoverished situations because they were socially boycotted, like
For denying.
not denying the entirety of the
Just
Holocaust,
that was an exaggeration.
just saying that it wasn't 6 million, it was so much, right?
Yeah.
That is the amount, like, because many liberal people criticize religion, saying that if you talk about any principle of religion, they will accuse you of infidelity and of apostasy, and then they will kill you. You have worse than this when it comes to the Holocaust. People like Noam Chomsky, even though he's famous in the world,
It's actually part of the national law in several countries.
absolutely, you can go to
Denying it-
jail. You can go
denying
to
it
jail.
is a-
Absolutely, in Austria, for example, you can go to jail for up to, if I remember correctly, because I read this many years ago, up to 6 years for saying anything against the Holocaust. Not just saying that it did not happen,
Just the numbers.
just the numbers, just saying
questioning
that
the
maybe it should be researched.
4 million, not instead of
And
6.
then this is the formal structure, right? The informal societal structure, because as I said, the oligarchs have penetration into all the echelons of society wherever it matters. So for example, if you're talking about the people controlling the universities, the board of directors, because many of these universities, especially in the United States, the topmost universities are funded by the alumni, right? And who are these alumni? They are people, if you just look them up, okay, this guy, famous person, works for the CFR, the Council for Foreign Relations, one of the major, most overt Zionist organizations.
There was a lot of pressure right now, right? There was
Exactly.
there was a few organizations at Harvard
Yeah.
who had the audacity
Yeah.
to speak up against the atrocities that Israel is committing. And there were CEOs, as you mentioned, of companies who came out and said, we want names of these students because we don't want to give them a job if they have it.
Absolutely.
Everything, boycott, suffocate them basically,
Absolutely.
just like the Palestinians.
This social, informal social system of suffocating and stifling opposition. A famous professor in the United States, Finkelstein, he again is a descendant of some of these Holocaust survivors. He says that I am not only unemployed right now, I am unemployable. Just because he supported, back in the day, he supported the Palestinian cause, and he would criticize Israel for its genocidal tactics, right? So you have this extreme, like if people have read 1948 by George Orwell, the entire situation, when you scratch underneath the surface, is Orwellian in nature. It is something that would put that novel to shame. It is such an environment of making people think in the same manner, not allowing anyone to speak out against. So if we were to come back to the Quranic perspective of the Jews, if we have time.
We have about maybe 5 to 10 minutes.
So I'll try to wrap this up.
Yeah, if you could, I just have a few more questions for you, if you could.
Absolutely. Because this is one of the major questions, right? If you talk against Israel, are you talking about the Jews?
Right.
Yeah, and can we be enemies of an entire religious denomination? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Within that altruistic, humanistic Islam that we all know and love, right? And then from the Western perspective, if you talk against Israel, are you automatically anti-Jew, and are you automatically a Nazi and a anti-Semite? So first of all, let us look at what the Quran says about Judaism. The Quran is very clear in its perspective, right?
It doesn't worry about losing a job.
It doesn't, exactly. God doesn't need to worry about losing a job, being he doesn't need to be politically correct at any time. He talks about objective truth, right? So he talks about the Jews, and he says that the Jews fall into two categories, very rational. He says you have the pious Jews, the righteous Jews. These are not Muslims, but they love God. They live according to those universal human values taught even by the Torah, right, and the Bible, and so on and so forth, right? And they are people, like the Quran says, these are people who cry for Allah's love at night, right? And the Christians fall into, some of the Christians also in the same category. So this is one category. And then the Quran talks about this other category of Jews. And if you look at the hallmarks that the Quran is talking about, this is exactly what we call the Zionists today, right? What are these hallmarks?
As you mentioned earlier, it's just the name change.
It's just the name change, because at the time of the Prophet, they would call them Yahud. Now you can call them Zionists.
The characteristics are the same.
The characteristics
And
are
not
the
just
same.
not just the two examples you're talking about, but all the other things, even beyond that, like Fir'aun and
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
Throughout,
Because this
the things
entire
that you had mentioned earlier.
psychosis of being a taghut, of being a transgressor,
has
being,
these characteristics.
has this characteristic, this narcissism. This is, it's interesting. So the first characteristic of these Jews, the Zionist Jews within the Quran, is that they believe that they have a covenant from God, they have a promise from God, that they are the promised, they are the chosen nation according to their ethnicity, not according to their religion. No. They are the chosen nation, and therefore, since they are the chosen nation, they have carte blanche. They can do anything. The entirety of the world population and everything else is just natural resource. They can use them as they want, right? And interestingly, we saw this again just a few days ago when one of the officials of the Zionist regime came on television, and we have this on social media right now as well, and he said, we are the chosen nation, and that means that we can do whatever the hell we want. And then he talks about killing babies and children and so on and so forth. So this is the first hallmark of a Zionist, a hardcore Zionist. And just as a footnote, we're not talking about some misled university student who doesn't know what Zionism is, and just for grabbing attention calls himself a Zionist, waves the Israeli flag. We're talking about the oligarchs, the people who are making policies, right? Who are actively on ground and implementing those policies. So the first hallmark is this this idea of being a chosen nation and everyone else being basically an animal. The second idea that the Quran presents is that the Yahud say that the hands of Allah have been bound. Because of this promise that He made to us, and because of our so many of our services to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, maybe, who now He's stuck. He can't do, even God cannot stop us from doing anything. He must support us. So He is hostage to these Zionists in their crooked and psychotic ideology. Number three,
He's a Gazan.
he is basically, he's completely in their control, and no one else. He cannot listen to the prayers of other people. He cannot support the oppressed. He needs to support them. Then the idea of them, the fact that the hallmark that they used to kill the prophets of Allah. The Quran says, if you truly say that you are friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then why did you kill the prophets? That is one of the hallmarks of them. And some of the scholars, they talk about this, they say that there is this part of their twisted ideology which says that murdering the innocents is important. It's not just about the prophets, it's about the masoom. Maybe one of the reasons why they target specifically children and women is maybe this ideology that they have, right? And we have seen this so much in other places, like for example, when you look at Daesh, when you look at other terrorist organizations, people with twisted ideologies, people who have been brainwashed in that manner, human values become nothing for them, right? And then one of the other hallmarks that they have is the idea that they are always oppressed. So they have this narrative that even when I'm killing you, I am the person who's the victim. Yeah. So they've always been the victim. So when the Prophet, he turned them out because of the fact that they were conspiring and trying to attack Medina, when he throws them out of from their fortresses around Medina, they are the victim, right? When they conspire to kill the Prophet, they are still the victim. When they kill the prophets of old times, they are still the victim. So if you take these four pieces of, if you like kind of act as a psychologist, and you have this, because you see, if anyone has studied psychology, for every psychotic disorder, they have a checklist. So if you check many of the boxes, this means that you are part of that psychological disorder. So these are the four of the major checklists, points on the checklist of psychotic Zionist behavior. And therefore, in modern times and throughout history, you have always had pious Jews, religious Jews, as well as secular Jews, who have been at the forefront of resistance against Zionism.
There is protests going on
Yeah.
right now.
Just a few
Well,
days ago, many of the people who flooded into the Congress, if you look at their t-shirts, they say, "This Jew stands with Palestine,
and it says not in my name.
not in my name."
Like, don't be committing these.
You have
crimes in
organizations
my-
called the Jews for Palestine in many campuses across the United States. Right? You have this religious organization who are ultra-Orthodox Jews called the Nutra Carta, and they are all over the world, and they are always out on Al-Quds Day. They're always out, and they say that according to the Torah, it is a sin for Zionists to be in the Holy Land. Right? So you have many Jewish intellectuals, you have many Jewish, like Imam Hussein said, if you cannot be a good Muslim, at least be a free person. Right? You have so many free people in the world, people who are not slaves to the narrative, who have this objective view of what's going on, and even though they do not have the same religious inclination as ourselves, but they support the Palestine cause, and they see right through the propaganda of the Zionists because of their core human
So essentially, we're not
values.
speaking up against Jews.
Absolutely
over here.
not.
That's what
Absolutely
you're suggesting.
not.
But a
Absolutely.
very specific ideology within the Jews, which is Zionism.
Even the solution that Imam Khamenei has repeated so many times, he has said that there should be one state in Palestine, just as it historically was, and then there should be a plebiscite, an election, basically a self-determination by all the indigenous people of Palestine, including the indigenous Jews. But these settlers who have come from Europe and from other places, they need to go back. Right?
So just to wrap up, I'm going to ask you two more questions. We're out of time, but just to at least get some of your wisdom on these, we perhaps don't have a lot of time to go into depth, but a lot of times the sort of narrative, and you've given us a really good foundation. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for understanding that everything that we see is perhaps skewed or twisted in a certain way. So the question that comes up, one that I asked you initially, which was, do we need to condemn this? And you gave your answer. Another question that comes up is, okay, Hamas, like within this vacuum of this incident, October 7th, Hamas was the first one who went over, right? Went into the border. What would you suggest Israel's sort of response should have been?
The response should be to pack up and leave.
Pack up and leave.
Yeah, absolutely. They are occupiers. It's like as if someone comes into my house, kills my wife, kills my children, kicks me out, takes over my house, and just because it's been like a decade or so, and I've been sitting outside protesting, now if I go in, this is still a illegitimate, illicit occupation.
So it's like they come into your house, for example, they put you in one room, and for 10 years you haven't been able to come to your kitchen or your garden. Now that you came to your garden, to kick them out.
Kick them out,
you're the
and now I'm the bad person.
You're the
one of the things that the scholars need to do in our communities is to teach our people the major fallacies that are repeated in these
over and over.
One of the major fallacies is to take things out of context, right? So you take one frame from history, and in that frame you see someone slapping another person, and all of a sudden this person who is slapping the other person is the oppressor. No, when you talk about Hamas attacking the settlements around Gaza, illegal settlements, even according to the United Nations, not just Islamic law. These are illegal settlements, even according to the United Nations and according to some of the highly prejudiced rulings of the United Nations, which they formally recognized the 1967 borders of the Israeli state, which is in itself is wrong. But even according to that parameter, these settlements are reoccupation. These are aggregated occupation. When they attacked these people, this wasn't something that just spontaneously happened. This is part of active resistance that has gone on ever since Hamas and Islamic Jihad have come into being, and before that by other organizations. You see, if there is a hiatus within a war, it doesn't mean that the war has ended.
Sure.
And at the same time, you need to realize, as you also mentioned in the beginning, before this, there was a slow and steady, almost daily regime of killing Palestinians. Not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank.
It was West Bank.
Yeah, exactly. So you said that there was an average of about one person dying every day?
One person a day for the past 2 years.
For the past 2 years. So
you can't blame that on Hamas.
You can't blame that on
But
Hamas.
you're still killing them.
Yeah.
And the last 2 weeks, you've killed almost 80 to 90 people over there.
Another, I forgot to mention one of the other hallmarks of the Zionists according to the Quran and the Sunnah. One of the things that they have is that they rarely attack overtly. The thing that they have done right now is because they have completely gone out of mind.
Right.
They see an existential threat and they're like just bombarding Gaza, and especially because they understand that when we're bombarding, then it's safer for them, right, than going in. But normally their methodology is to use subversive tactics to destroy their enemies, right? So for example, in the case of Hazrat Isa alayhi salam, they got the Romans to try to kill Hazrat Isa alayhi salam, because the Quran says that they recognized the prophets like as if they were their own children, right? So they didn't want to get that sin on their own hand. They got the Romans to do this. Anyhow, and we're talking about Zionists, not the Jews. Right. So if you look at that, they ever since the inception of Israel, they've had this slow regime of trying to kill the indigenous population or drive it out. So all of these policies, a network of policies, including murder, including poisoning the water resources because they control all the water resources, including providing expired medicine to hospitals.
Phosphorus bombs.
Phosphorus bombs,
in
exactly.
These past 2 weeks.
Absolutely. So all of these tactics it is an ongoing erosive onslaught upon the Palestinian people.
So by no context, by no means
Absolutely.
Can you say that Hamas initiated this?
Yeah. It's like, let me give you an analogy. If I'm sitting here and I'm not bothering anyone, and this is my own house, and someone comes in and after every few seconds slaps me on the face, right? Then destroys some of my property, then kicks my children in the stomach, and just goes on, and I can see that these in isolation, each of these events in itself is not murder, but it culminates to murder, and I can see that this is going to wipe me out. If I stand up and I fight this person, am I the oppressor? This is absolutely legitimate, the right of defense. Right? So from our perspective, not just the Islamic perspective, but from the human perspective, we stand completely behind what Hamas did. In fact, like Sayyidina al-Qaid, Imam Khamenei said, we are proud of what they did. Because instead of dying in small doses, it is better to fight, like Imam Hussain alayhi salam said, it is better to live like a lion for a day. Go out and fight. One of the other fallacies that they involve, just because this is related to this, is that the Hamas went out, Islamic Jihad went out, and they killed innocent civilians. Brothers and sisters, there are no innocent civilians in the Israeli regime. They are all illegal settlements. Let's leave Islam aside for a second. According to the Geneva Convention, if a land is occupied by a foreign force and then their civilian population is brought in and placed into this land, this civilian population becomes a legitimate target for the resistance. According to secular law, internationally recognized secular law. That is one of the reasons why they have never been able to take Hamas to The Hague. It's always been unilateral sanctions, because international law also goes against this. So, and then the propaganda, they said that they beheaded children, right?
And retracted it then.
And then they rejected it because alhamdulillah, now there are so many people online, they are activists, online activists, they are professionals who can debunk this in absolutely like in moments, right? And on the other side, you see that the genocidal activities, bombings of hospitals, right? There is like no gray area there. But this is part of that narrative that they grow, this web of lies and illusions that they create.
It's going to be very unfair of me, but I'm going to do it anyways. No one in the world has been able to do this. But within 30 seconds, What's the solution to this conflict?
The solution of the conflict is what Imam Khamenei and before him Imam Khomeini said very clearly, which is based on not only Islamic law, which we believe to be divine law and absolutely in accordance to basic human values, but also according to international law, the principles of international law and of universally recognized human values. The only solution is the end of the occupation, not to the borders of 1967, but back right to the beginning. The territorial integrity of one Palestine for its indigenous population and the booting out of everyone who has immigrated there under the Zionist regime. Now, this question that where will they go has nothing to do with us. People who have sponsored these people for so many years can give them part of their own land. I believe New York and Manhattan would be a great place for a new Israel to migrate to.
And maybe it started because
because now they're fleeing here anyway.
No, there's a just I think yesterday or the day before today, right? There's a visa waiver kind of.
They said that they don't need visas.
Absolutely,
absolutely.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate, and I'm sure the viewers benefited as much as I did. So here's some questions that the brothers and sisters who have been listening and benefiting that they've sent. If you want to take a break, maybe have a sip of water, then I'll start with these. So the first question is this, and there's a few questions. We have about maybe 20 minutes or so, I think. So we're going to have to maybe try to keep these short, if you will, please.
Absolutely.
How do we explain to children that we are moving towards victory when they're continuously seeing images of bloodshed and loss of innocent lives?
This is maybe easier for the Shias, and especially in modern times, than it might be for other denominations. Why? Because of Karbala.
Because of Karbala.
Our children are brought up with the image and the idea of Imam Hussein and how his sacred family was slaughtered on the fields of Karbala alayhi salam. And now we've seen how that played out. As Imam Khomeini said, famously said, he said, if it hadn't been for Ashura and it hadn't been for Muharram and Safar, then Islam would have been eliminated. And the Islamic revolution and all of the fruits that has brought about is because of the movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So almost instinctively, Shia children, alhamdulillah, they understand the victory of innocence. They understand
with
the victory.
The spilling of blood.
Yeah, they understand the victory of what they call blood over the sword, right? And they feel this pride for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Right? So this is maybe one of the great gifts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe for other communities you would need to bring in more more earthly arguments, more non-spiritual arguments, but this, at least the groundworks are available for our own children.
Well, one thing that one of the senior teachers in the Hawza was talking about recently is there's almost now, the numbers are going up almost close to 5,000, reaching the 5,000, 4,500. People who've been martyred in Palestine. Very recently, there was an earthquake in the region where there were 5,000 plus lives that were lost. So what he was saying is not to say, obviously, that those lives are worth less or these are worth more, but look at the effect of the blood. Same number of lives lost. Look at the effect of these lives lost. Look at the mass protests that have come out. It's not just Muslims.
You see,
it's
the
all
awakening
across the world
of the human soul.
With blood spilling.
7 years ago, I was active on social media by another name, and I was in contact with many journalists, independent journalists in the West and in the Arab world. So my focus was on that. And there's this journalist named Eva Bartlett, who was an upcoming journalist at that time. And I used to read what she wrote, and I would comment, and she would comment back, and other people as well. There was this common narrative that they had, and it was very interesting. I picked this up. They said that the Palestine issue is a litmus test for humanity. Like, if you have human values, if that light is still alive within you, you will gravitate towards the Palestinian people. There's some sort of a magic there. But coming back to the question, So one is this this gift that Allah has given us in terms of Karbala. If you ask our children who won in Karbala, Imam Hussain. If you have talked about Imam Ali alayhi salam, fustu bi Rabbil Kaaba, at the moment of his martyrdom, right?
Right.
He says, Alhamdulillah, by God I have become successful, right? And then when we teach our children about the afterlife, when we teach them about the long game, when we teach them not to be materialists, if we have done that investment in our lives, then that will pay off right now. Because the way someone dies, the way someone leaves this world, it's the quality of that death that matters.
Right.
Right.
And the miraculous nature of the spilling
Absolutely.
of pure blood
Yeah.
is that the results will be seen in this world as well.
In this
These
world
are
as well.
promises
Absolutely.
of the Quran.
Absolutely.
These
Absolutely.
are promises of the Quran. Thank you very much. Next question. What should be the source of information? We say, what should be the source of information? Question. We say Western media is biased, but why should someone believe the Islamic media or any media for
Excellent question.
source?
Excellent question. I wanted to touch upon this in more detail, but hope this has given me an opportunity. I talked about the economy of trust. So the first point here is, the first thing that we need to understand is that you must invest your trust somewhere or the other. So because as I said earlier,
Unless you yourself go become an expert.
which is not possible for a vast majority of people in the world, right? And even the experts will be an expert in a certain field.
Right. And they would have to go through these sources to become an expert.
Exactly, right? So the channel itself and the path itself. So you need to invest your trust somewhere or the other, right? Now, based on the fundamental and the most rational arguments that we have about the truth of Islam, which obviously we don't have time to repeat right now, but when we've established that God exists, and Islam is the religion, and the Prophet of Islam sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the true Prophet, and then the Aimma, and then the Sharia of Islam according to the Ahlul Bayt. When we have established all of this without any doubt, then we can put our trust in here. And as I said, the Quran said that when you want to receive news, go to those who are not fasiq, So who are these people? The Mu'minun, right? So if we are trusting Islamic media, yes, we are investing our trust there, right? We should not have this illusion that we will be able to research everything and come to an objective opinion firsthand, because we cannot, right? Very few people can do this. So we will have to invest our trust there, but this investment of our trust is based upon a principle that the infinitely wise Allah has directed us to do. So our trust is basically invested in that. And then to complete this, as I said, when you're trusting Islamic media, right? When you're trusting the scholars, when you're trusting infrastructures created, for example, by the Islamic Revolution and its affiliated movements around the world, it does not mean that you stop listening to other media sources as well. In fact,
And that's something you had mentioned, that
it's
almost important to be able to see the truth, to
Exactly.
be, to have a look at the complete
to
propaganda,
compare, yeah. There's something very interesting that Shaykh Mutahari says in another context, but the sentence is interesting. He says that whenever I go towards studying the batil, fallacies and falsehoods, right, I am very confident because I have my trust in what my religious assets are, right? One of the interesting things that will happen when you start reading local sources, like local Palestinian sources, right, local sources in different these hot points around the world, and the Islamic media, is that the fallacy and the lies of the Western media will become very clear to you. And it is through comparison, like Imam Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, he says that by comparing different opinions, truth reveals itself, right? So that in itself is an exercise that I invite the
one of the
audience
things
towards.
that perhaps that can be added to that is now with a lot of Instagram and this and that,
Social media.
there's certain people or certain channels that are actually posting videos,
Yeah,
like video of what's happening right there.
absolutely.
So
Live videos. Yeah.
You don't need someone, a third party, to put these videos together and kind of twist the narrative of how they want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's right there.
It's right there. Then maybe some of our more perceptive people in the audience would say, but this is the age of AI. How do I know this is not deep fake, right? Again, the issue comes back to the economy of trust. Do I trust the BBC not to use deep fake just because they are the BBC? Do I trust Zionist people on social media or mainstream outlets on social media not to use these? Or do I trust someone? Then when you look at the variety of sources, when we talk about independent media, we're not just talking about Muslim sources. We're talking about a variety of sources. So we have, for example, people tweeting from the United States who are Jews themselves, and they are tweeting information, first-hand information, because they're in contact with the Palestinians online. They're tweeting. Now, this guy is a Jew, and his nationality is American. Another person is from Russia. Another person is from China. You see, in the past, you had one channel of information. Now you have a variety of channels of information. Now, if I were to give an example here, if, for example, you were sitting at home and suddenly a large crowd comes and tells you that there's a disaster that's happening and you need to flee. Okay, you say that, okay, this is just one person, this is one group, right? Then another group of different nationalities, different ethnicities, different kinds of people, different neighborhoods. Your human psychology, basic human psychology says, how could there be a consensus among such a diverse group of people, right? That is something that we need to invest in. If you want to trust Muslim media, that is very good. That is very good, because as we said, this has foundations in our ideology and it is worth trusting. But if you want to go beyond, then you can just look at all of these independent sources who have no links with one another, no active links with one another.
Okay. We literally have, I think, 5 minutes left, and I still have a lot of questions. So maybe we can try to get through as many questions with wherever you think. Is the war between Palestine and Israelis termed as jihad? That's one. Jihad is only permissible in the presence of an infallible leader, right? So that's a question. Some Shias say we should wait for Imam Zaman for the liberation of Palestine, and we're just creating bloodshed and chaos right now. What's your thoughts on this? So three questions. Is this considered jihad? Isn't jihad only permissible during the time of the
very
Imam?
quickly,
and the third one is, some say that we should wait for the Imam.
There are two kinds of jihad in the school of the jurisprudence of the school of the Ahlul Bayt. There is jihad al-Difai, jihad,
defensive.
The defensive jihad, and then there is offensive jihad, right? So the offensive jihad, except for Sayyid al-Khuy rahmatullah alayh, most of the other scholars, they say that this cannot happen without the explicit directives of the infallible Imam, not even his deputy. So even Imam Khomeini Rizwanullah ta'ala alayhi himself, he himself being this great revolutionary and everything, he was of the opinion that he cannot give a fatwa for offensive jihad, right? But defensive jihad requires no
infallible Imam.
No infallible Imam, right? And its management requires that somehow the chain hierarchy goes back to someone who has legitimate authority from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we believe that our Maraji, and especially the Wali Faqih, especially
jurisprudence, the
absolutely. And if you look at Hamas, for example, and Islamic Jihad, loosely speaking, we are not like, we cannot say that they are like Muqallideen, because they are obviously Ahl Sunnah, and Alhamdulillah, they are on the same page as the Shia in this matter and in many matters. But they have their directives, their general directive of defense from the Fuqaha, and Alhamdulillah, this is one of the case where all the Fuqaha are on the same page. So it's not just like the Wali Faqih is saying something and Sayyid Sistani is saying something else. Alhamdulillah, in most cases they are always on the same page, but right now, especially in this case, Sayyid Sistani, all of the Maraji Najaf, all of the Maraji Qum, all of them have come out
condemned.
Absolutely, they have condemned, and they have congratulated me at many times what Hamas has done.
Quick question, you said there's two types of jihads.
Yeah.
What Hamas did right now, is it offensive or defensive?
It's defensive.
Defensive.
Just before we go on to that, defensive jihad, even though it requires legitimacy from the Fuqaha, but because it is an inherent human right, for example, consider in old times, you do not have any access to the Imam who is in Kufa or in Medina. And in your own village, you have no access, you do not even have a naib, you do not even have a faqih or a student of a faqih or anything, anyone from the hierarchy, right? And then foreigners invade your land because you're on the borders, right? And we have that famous dua of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam for people protecting the borders, who were obviously not Shia. Most of them were, the vast majority were not Shia at that time. So what do you do, right? So because the basic essence of Islamic jurisprudence is absolute rationality, you can never take the right of self-defense away from people being attacked.
And that's something that everyone naturally understands.
Everyone naturally understands that. It's like universal. So it's not just a part of Islamic jurisprudence, it's part, and especially if it's a defensive jihad, you would not require, in special circumstances, especially if communication channels are not available, you would not require explicit directives even from the Wali of Hakim.
So you can't look at this in sort of a window of October 7th to October 21st. If you just look at it in a vacuum, these 2 weeks, maybe someone would be able to argue that, no, it is offensive. If they initiated this.
As you remember, we talked about this fallacy of taking things in isolation, right?
Exactly.
If you look at it in the larger context, in the true context of this ongoing conflict, and this slow and steady murderous regime of killing people off without cameras watching, right? If you look at it from that perspective, this was a defensive maneuver which was absolutely needed, and was in fact, people were waiting for it for a long time. One of the major criticisms against Hamas and Islamic Jihad by many people around the world, especially Muslims across the board, and I'm not talking about the fuqaha, I'm talking about grassroots Muslims, is why don't you fight back, right? Because it was so clear that you're being murdered on a daily basis, you're being murdered, your children are being murdered, there is genocide, like they are trying to get rid of your race, trying to subvert the process of basically the race going on and that ethnicity going on through childbirth.
Last question. I apologize to the brothers and sisters who might have asked other questions. We're unfortunately out of time.
That fourth piece of the, did we deal with that? The fourth section of the last question?
It's gone.
Oh, it's gone.
It's okay. How to respond to people who get offended on drawing parallels between Karbala and today? This is something we see very often.
Again, yeah, a great question. One of the symptoms of us drifting away from the Quran, and we have this in our narrated traditions, that one of the things that will happen on the Day of Judgment is that the Quran will come forward in front of God and say that these people forgot me, whereas the Quran is the essential document of God. And you cannot understand the school of thought of the Ahlul Bayt, you cannot understand the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt, the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, without having a Quranic mentality, this software installed into your soul, right? So one of the major principles within the Quran, wherein it talks about the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it says, لَقَدْ كَانَ فِيكُمْ لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. And our exegetes are the commentators on the Quran through the narrated traditions of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. They say that this is not particular to the Holy Prophet. This is talking about that office of wilayah, right? So it's about the imams, all of the immaculate imams is the same thing. All of them are uswatun hasana. Now uswatun hasana again is in, because it does not say uswatun hasana fi in your individual life,
right?
Fi hayatikum al-infiradi, fi hayatikum al-ijtimai, in your social life.
Right.
No, it says uswatun hasana in the absolute sense. So when you're talking about war, when you're talking about peace, when you're talking about raising your children, when you're talking about going about your mundane activities of eating and drinking and going to sleep, when you're talking about politics, when you're talking about economics, all of them, uswatun hasana, the best ideal for emulating is the Holy Prophet and his family. Therefore, the most natural thing to do in any situation that comes up for Muslims around the world is to fall back upon the history of the Ahlul Bayt and to draw parallels from there. Obviously, drawing these parallels does not mean that the existential value of the Imams is equal to the Shuhada of our time. No one says that. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he's
literally drawing a parallel, what that means.
Basic, but that is the fallacy that comes to many people's minds. That why are you comparing this to Imam Hussein? We're not comparing this to Imam Hussein, his personality and his value in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're not saying that because Imam Hussein, we're comparing Imam Hussein to the martyrs of Palestine, or maybe comparing him to the martyrs of the revolution and to the defense of the sacred shrines. We're not saying that all of these have become Imams. We're not saying that all of these are the holders of legitimate authority but from Allah subhanahu
Like
wa
the
ta'ala.
Hussein of the time or the
Yeah.
Muslim of the time.
Yeah, but even when we raise these slogans, we're talking about the people who are emulating the Imam.
Similarity in the
Similarity.
characteristics,
And
similarity in the stances.
absolutely. There's a narrated tradition, and this is like completely the chain of narration and everything is perfect. I'll paraphrase because we don't have much time. One of the essential duties, maybe the most essential duty of every believer in his life, this time that has been appropriated to them, given to them, is to become as similar to the infallibles as possible. That is your journey as a wayfarer towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to try to become as close to the personality and the virtue of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam as possible. And obviously you will never reach that infinity. People who have like a background in mathematics, they know that there's this graph that they draw, that thing tends towards infinite, right? But it never reaches that, right? That is the essence, because whenever you're going towards values, you're going towards these virtues, you're always going through the infallible Imams, through Imam al-Hujjah, right? So this is one of those great misconceptions. First, to summarize, the essential role of the infallibles alayhimus salam, their creation, the philosophy of their creation, and Allah sending them out towards us, is to be these ideals who form these archetypes in history that you compare everything to. Even compare your own progress and your own duties and your own works with them. Would Ali ibn Abi Talib do this? That is the question you need to ask yourself on a daily basis, doing everything, right? And then on the other side, the other point that you made, and that was very valid, that when you are comparing events or people to these great personalities, it does not mean that you are saying that these are equal to them.
Obviously.
Right? You are saying that they are on the same path, that they are following the same mission. And therefore, if you support these oppressed people or these revolutionaries or the people who have raised the banner of true Islam in our times, then you are in fact indirectly, you are emulating the Imams, and you are in fact providing your support to the mission of the Imams.
I would say maybe even, maybe even this would be too heavy for people who don't understand, and they'd be like, the same path, how can this be the... I would just even say there's similarities.
Similarities, yeah.
Similarities, is that something? And even when you look at the Quran, right, Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam is when? 61 Hijri, his shahadat. But the Quran came like much before that, right, half a century before that. And what Imam Hussein did in Karbala is just a manifestation of verses of the Quran, the principles of the Quran. So the story doesn't start from Imam Hussein, as you mentioned.
Let me add a little point here. It's interesting how mistakes are repeated and fallacies are repeated throughout history. One of this same fallacy, because all of these bil akhir, they are put into our imaginations by Shaitan, right? And he's always there. He's been throughout history. One of these fallacies in the time of Imam Hussein, by a majority of people who did not believe in the infallible nature of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and the same happened for all the other Imams, was, why are you comparing these people, these Imams, these Sayyids, to the Prophet? The Prophet was infallible, he's gone now. These are Sadat, they are good scholars, they are good people, they are pious people. Don't compare them to the Prophet. You see, the same idea like recycles itself.
Right.
So when it comes to the Naib of the Imam, in his own time, Hazrat Muslim ibn Aqil, the Naib of the Imam, the deputy of the Imam in Kufa. No. He is Muslim.
He wasn't good enough
He is not good enough.
pay allegiance to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although the Imam sent him directly.
We'll wait for Imam Hussain alayhi salam, right? And then in other places as well, because this was the major, like something that has been highlighted in history, but throughout history. And then in the occultation, right from the time of Khulaini, Rizwanullah Ta'ala alayh, you always had this fallacy that, okay, these aren't infallible anymore. They might not be infallible, but the infallible Imams have said that you need to follow them absolutely.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Thank you so much. Thank you again for all the knowledge and everything that you've shared. I benefited a lot, and I'm sure the brothers and sisters benefited as well. Inshallah, we'll be ending this session here. If there is a chance to, inshallah, benefit from Sayyid Agha Ali Raza again, we'll inshallah invite him again. But at the end, I'd just like to pray for our dear brothers and sisters in Palestine. May Allah inshallah protect them. May Allah bless them with victory, and may He hasten the reappearance of our Imam, and inshallah relieve all of us of this impression in this world through His return. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam.